In the previous video, we created this front-end React application with login and register pages. In this video, we will integrate the backend APIs in the front-end React app. Now let's start the server application first, so I will change the directory to the server folder. And I will execute yarn start command to start the server. You can also use npm start command if you want. Now click on this plus icon to open one more terminal. Change the directory to client and execute yarn dev or npm run dev command. So now front-end and back-end is started correctly. Right now, if I click on register, you can see there is no error message shown even if all the fields are mandatory. So let's first display an error message, so we will not be registering users with empty values. Inside the handle submit method, we will first destructure the state object. State object contains the user entered username, email, and password. And we will check if username.trim not equal to empty. Email.trim not equal to empty, and password.trim not equal to empty. Here, we're using string trim method, because user might enter just spaces as the input, which we should not allow, so trim method removes all the spaces from the beginning and end of the string. So always use trim method to check for empty values, and if all the values are entered, then we will register the user. Otherwise, we will display an error message. To store the error message, let's declare a new state variable. We will initialize to an empty value by default. And we will call it error message. Now let's set the error message using this setErrorMessage function. And we will say, all the fields are required. And if user has entered all the details, then we will clear out that error message by setting it to an empty string. Now let's display that error message inside the form. So if the error message is not empty, then we will display it inside a paragraph tag. As you can see, we're getting an error message when we don't enter any value in the input form. Let's change the color of the error message so it will look like an error message. And I will add CSS for this class and index.css file. Now you can see, the error message is displaying in red color. Now if I enter name and email and click on the register button, we will still see the error message because password is not entered. And if I enter the password, the error will not be displayed. And if I remove any entered value, you will see the error message again. Now let's make the API call if everything is entered. We first need to install the Axios library so we can make the API call. Make sure to install it in the client folder. Now let's start the React application again. Let's first import the Axios library. As I will be using async await syntax, let's add try-catch block, and I will declare the function as async. And I will use axios.post method to make a post API call. Now to find out the API URL, we can open index.js file. The URL starts with /API/users. And the /root is for adding or registering a new user. So the final API URL will be like this, localhost:3030. Port is 3030 because we mentioned it in the index.js file. And after that, we'll have /API/users as the path. This is a post request, that's why we're getting error if we directly access it. Now here, we can pass the copied URL. And as a second argument, we need to pass the user entered data as an object. The state variable contains all the data user has entered which we can pass. In the user model we can see, we need name, email, and password to register, and tokens is an optional field. If you see, name of the property is name and not username, so while passing we need to pass name property. So what we can do is, we will pass an object, and inside it, we will spread out all the properties of state. And we will add name property whose value will come from state username. The Axios response always comes in data property, so let's destructure it. And we will use a wait keyword here. Now we can console log the data. Let's also log the error in catch block to see the error if any. Now let's verify the functionality. Let's open the Dev Tools, and we will click on the Register button. We're getting an error which is as expected. Now let's try to register a new user. Let me pull this up so we can see the requests. As you can see, we're getting course error. In the console, you can see the complete error, request has been blocked by course policy. We're getting error because our React application is running on port 5173 and our backend application is running on port 3030. So by default browser does not allow that, because allowing cross-domain or cross-port requests are a security issue, so no one should access anyone else's APIs unless that API is public. So to make our APIs publicly accessible, we need to install the course npm package. This package adds access control allow origin HTTP header to make it publicly accessible. To use this package, we just need to add the course package as a middleware using app.use. You can also pass options to allow access to requests from specific URL only, which you should do before deploying your application to production. For now we will allow everyone to access the API without passing any options. So let's install the course package. Make sure to install it in the server folder because it needs to be added to the backend code. Now in index.js file, let's import the course package first. And before this Express.json line, add another app.use and just call the course method. With this single line of code, we allow our application APIs to be publicly accessible to anyone. Now let's start the backend application again. Let's clear the errors now, and we will register a new user again. As you can see now, the API is successful and we don't have any course error now. In console also we can see the response coming from the API with user and token. Same we can see in the preview tab of network request. Now once the registration is successful, we need to redirect the user to the home page. So let's do that now. So we will use the useNavigate hook from React Router DOM. And we will call the navigate method by passing it / as the root path. We're using / because we have defined dashboard component for the / path, as you can see in the app.jsx file. So the line numbers 40 and 41 will only be executed if the API is successful, because we're using a wait keyword here. And if there is any error, we will set the error message state. And we will say, something went wrong. Try again later. Let's try registering a new user now. If I click on the register button, you can see we're automatically redirected to the dashboard page after successful registration. Now to see the error message, we can call throw new error to throw an error. Let's move this inside the try block. So whenever there is any error thrown from the try block, the catch block will be executed and the error message state will be set. Now let's register a new user again. As you can see, we correctly get the error message displayed on the screen. So this is fine for front-end errors. But what if there is some back-end error while registering a user? Even if there is any back-end error, right now we're always showing this hard-coded error, which is not good. So let's say in add to do, we're sending back a specific error message from the server if the fields are not valid. Similarly, while authenticating a user, we're sending back a specific error message if the user is not found. So these error messages will never be displayed if we keep displaying this hard-coded error message. So to get them displayed, let's first throw an error from this addUser function. So when this handler function is executed, error will be thrown, so catch handler will be executed, and we will send back this error message from the server to our React application. Now if I click on the register button again, the request will fail because of the server error. As you can see, there is an error in the console. And in the Network tab, in the API response, you can see the actual error message coming from the server. Error while adding user, try again later. But we're still showing the hard-coded error message of something went wrong on the UI. So let's display the actual error message coming from the server. So whenever there is any server error, we get that error in the error.response object. And we can move this set error message call inside the if condition. But instead of the hard-coded error message, we will update the state with error.response.data property, which contains the actual error message. And if there is no server error message, then we will display our hard-coded error message. We will move this console log statement outside, so we will always see the error message logged to the console whenever there is any error. Now if I click on the register button, you can see we're correctly getting the error message coming from the backend. Now let's log the error.response object, so you will get an idea of what it contains. If I register again, you can see it contains a data property along with other useful information. So because we're using the Axios library, the response or error message will always come in the data property. Now let's say there is no backend error coming from the API. Instead, there is a client-side error. So I will throw an error from the try block. So in this case, error.response will be undefined. As you can see here, error.response is printed as undefined. So when error.response is undefined, the else block will be executed, and we will see this error message displayed on the UI. Now at the backend, there is no error while adding new user, and at front end also we don't have any error, so in that case, user will be registered successfully and we will be navigated to the dashboard page. As you can see, there is no error and we're also navigated to dashboard page. So we have successfully integrated the backend API with our React application. One issue we have is that we have hard-coded the entire API URL here, which is not good, because if we're making API calls in multiple components like login, dashboard, etc., then later while deploying the application on production, we will need to change the base URL in every component. So to fix this, we can create a utils folder inside src, and inside that create constants.js file. Note that the file does not end with .jsx, because we will not be writing any JSX code here. So I will create a constant with name base API URL, and I will paste the base URL of the API as a value. And it will have just this part, without the root path. So this is the base API URL which we're exporting as a named export. Now we can use ES6 template literal syntax and use that constant here. We have imported the constant at the top. So now with this change, if any time the base URL changes, we need to change it only in the constants.js file, and wherever we're using this constant, it will be automatically reflected. Also note that there is no slash at the end of the base URL, instead we added it while calling the API. But if we add slash here, to avoid double slashes, we need to remove it from here. But it does not look good, so don't add it in the base URL, instead add it while calling the API. So now with this change also, the registration of new users should work without any issue. As you can see, registration is successful. But there is one issue: whenever we click on the register button, we're not immediately redirected to the dashboard page after successful registration, as it takes some time to get the API response. Let me register another user so you can see that. Now when I click on register, you can see there is some delay before I'm redirected to the dashboard page. So user might get confused and he will click the register button multiple times, which is not good. So we can display a submitting text instead of register once user clicks on the button. So let's declare a new state, let's call it submitting. And it will have an initial value of false. And inside the handle submit method, if all the values are filled in, we will set the submitting value to true. And if there is any error, we will set it to false, so we can click the register button to try submission again. And now, for the register button text, we will check if we're submitting, then display submitting text, otherwise display register text. Now let's register a new user, and make sure to keep an eye on the register button text. As you saw, for some seconds, the text was changed to submitting and we're redirected to dashboard. It's also good to disable the button while submitting, so user will not be clicking the button continuously. So we can add disabled prop for the button, and the button will be disabled only when value of submitting is true. Now let's register a new user to see it in action. So when I click on register, you can see it's disabled for a while and then we're redirected. That's it about this video. In the next video, we will integrate login API and we will also add JWT authentication. If you found this video useful, do like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.